But it's true, we can ramble, so I'm going to try to be focused because I really would like to have a conversation with you. This isn't the greatest venue for conversation, but it's my great hope that we will have a conversation. And in that conversation, nothing is off limits. You can ask me about anything. We can go back into the deep past, or we can go to the near future or the far future, however you'd like to do it. So I don't think you should feel constrained or restricted, and I will try to leave lots of time for question and answer, and when it gets to be a little tiring, we'll end the meeting, and I'll still stick around and answer any questions you have. So don't feel overly anxious to get in. Let me begin by kind of naming the moment we're in, and then trying to talk from that moment into the question of education and the question of educational change and educational reform. I was in Grant Park on the night of November 4th. Were any of you there in Chicago, Grant Park? I didn't see you there. Damn. How could I? There were 1 million people there. But it was a pretty exciting crowd. And actually, even though you were here in Florida, many of you feel like you were in Grant Park because it had that kind of universal feeling. I was with several colleagues from different countries, and they were all on cell phones to South Africa and to Paris. And there was a feeling all over the place that we were all in Grant Park. And I'll tell you, I've been in a lot of large crowds in my life, but never one that was so filled with the spirit of joy and unity and relief, a bit of relief, but a sense that we were witnessing something brand new. And I do think we were witnessing something new. I think not only the election of the first African-American president, which I think we have to note is a significant development and a significant blow, if not a fatal blow, but certainly a significant blow against a history of white supremacy and slavery, an exciting, exciting development. And around the world, people are still gasping, wondering, what the hell was that? What happened? And but not only that, but a generational shift. To see this young man take control of the national government. What a wonderful thing to see this bright young man turn in that direction. And then, perhaps even of equal importance, somebody who comes out of community organizing, somebody who comes out of a sense that he could sit comfortably on the south side of Chicago in the home of a poor person and have a conversation with a fellow citizen, citizen to citizen. When have we had anyone occupy the White House who has had that experience? And not only has he had that experience, but his election really depended on community organizing. I met some of the folks here who organized here on campus in this campaign. And now here are millions of young people all fired up, and what are they going to do? So I think we have to kind of salute the moment and say, this is an interesting moment. And in a season of extraordinary political speeches, that speech was extraordinary, that election night speech, for its restraint, for its embrace of everyone. Do you remember the line in the speech where he said, if you didn't vote for me, I'm still going to try to win your confidence. I'm still going to be your president. That's a very different philosophy of government than the philosophy that says, I represent those who voted for me, which is always a tiny minority of the full population. Well, that was exciting, and it was wonderful to be there, and I tell you, it was... But again, what do I know? I was kind of in the park breathing all that good air, and I was probably drinking the Kool-Aid as well. So it felt, it felt extra special, but it really did, and I still kind of resonate from it. So I kind of feel like we've turned the page on the era of 9/11, on the politics of fear and division and war and scapegoating, and we've entered the era of yes, we can. So yes, we can, but can what? And that's what I want to focus on at the beginning. Yes, we can. What can we do? I want to note that a lot of my friends, and probably a lot of you who became political junkies during the election, weren't you? Some of you were, I met some of you actually today who were looking at every poll and worrying about every nuance of everything that happened every day. Weren't some of you on the computer like 24/7? I can see the ones who were. Exactly. And then after the election, there was kind of this feeling of, I don't know what, like I went on the computer the next day and I wanted to watch McCain's speech, and I got halfway through it and I thought, Why am I doing this to myself? Am I so hooked in that I can't kind of take a break? Why don't I read a novel? In fact, why don't I read a long Russian novel, and kind of detoxify? But no, I think many of us are kind of suffering of kind of postpartum depression, and so we don't have the polls to read anymore, so now we read the mind of the president-elect. What does this appointment mean? What does that appointment mean? What's going to happen next? And we're kind of reading the tea leaves. And I want to urge all of us, you and me, and Dr. Kemp, to move away from that kind of close study of everything that's happening and ask ourselves, what are we doing in this period of Yes, We Can? What are you doing? What am I doing? And I want to remind us that Lyndon Johnson, for example, who you remember from history, passed the most far-reaching civil rights legislation in history, but he was not a member of the civil rights movement. He was not a part of it. He was responding to it. He was an effective politician, but he was not part of that massive movement that changed America. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, passed the most far-reaching social legislation. Dr. Kemp spoke about some of it. Labor legislation, very important in the history of the 20th century. And yet, FDR was not a labor leader, did not participate in the labor movement. And Abraham Lincoln did not belong to an abolitionist party. So something was happening that didn't have to do with the great man doing something by himself. And that's the message that I want to argue tonight that is very important, whether we're talking about education or foreign policy or anything else. We have to think about a couple of things. One is, I think, movement building movements for social change. And movements aren't brought into being because of willfulness. You can't will a movement into being. But nor can you sit idly by wondering when will the movement arrive that will represent my aspirations, my hope for a more just and more peaceful social order. You can't sit idly and wait for it, neither can you will it into being. So what can you do? Well, among the things you can do, I'm happy to take your question or comment. You don't have to leave, honestly. What do we do? And I would argue that movement building involves two things right off the bat. First of all, it involves making connections, seeing the connections around you, opening your eyes and looking at the world and seeing how things are connected. So if you are participating in the anti-war movement, for example, and I met some folks today who are, the anti-war movement is linked very closely with the problem of disabilities, because what's happened in Iraq is not just that thousands and thousands of Americans have been killed, but far more than that have been wounded, injured, and are going to come home hurt. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to see those linkages? And how are we going to make those connections? That's part of it. But the other part of it is changing the frame, reframing the issues that we find ourselves confronted with. Let me explain. I know some of you know exactly what I mean, but just let me explain for a minute. We get caught in dominant metaphors, and those dominant metaphors define how it is we think about an issue. So take the question, I'll think of a couple. Okay, take the question in education. If we hear a candidate, and we did hear a candidate in this last presidential election say, for example, we have to get rid of the lazy teachers who are incompetent and not educating our children. We all kind of nod dully, don't we? I mean, I do. I don't. Who's going to stand up and defend the lazy teachers? Not me. No, I want my kid to have a lazy teacher who's incompetent. No. I mean, nobody would defend that. But who just defined the issue? Who defined the problem? The person who made that statement.